what I'd like to do is just, I thought it would be interesting because most of the folks in here have been here before. I do expect some new people will probably show up, but the church is not going to advertise this or any existing class uh, for at least 4 weeks because they want to really focus on the communities. And so I don't expect anybody, so they're not even going to tell anybody that might be interested that the class is going on. But that's all right. We've got existing people here, and we'll see if we get new people that might show up in the next month or so. Um, what I'd like to do tonight, and this is more or less a continuation of what we had studied last year. I'm not going to go through, usually, first night I go through kind of an introduction and reasons for studying prophecy and so on, but I'm not sure that's necessary tonight because we've all been through that. If do get some new people, we'll have to address that maybe by doing a separate class or something, but we'll take that as it comes. So what I thought I would do tonight, and again, I encourage your comments and questions, is to go through and probably we'll go through this presentation I've done. It's kind of rough. There's nothing special about this PowerPoint, but I thought what I would do is to go through a number of what I call high level updates that have occurred or ongoing, may have changed a little bit since we got together back in June, some of us anyway. And there's seven, I think it is, individual topics I want to address. First of all, I want to kind of go through and give an Israel update. I think we're probably all watching the news. And it's interesting, and we're going to see in just a moment kind of where Israel is today in terms of world recognition or condemnation, or however you want to call it. So we're going to do a quick Israel update, and then we're going to take a look at the Gog-Magog invasion or coming invasion. We'll update on where we are with that, because I believe all of the pieces for the Ezekiel 38-39 invasion are in place. They certainly, the players are in place. Uh, but as we'll see when we talk about it, Israel has to be in a time of peace and security or safety when that event occurs. So, but again, things are happening so quickly, I think that could happen as well very quickly. We're going to look at some economic highlights. Where's the economy going? And I can tell you it's pretty bleak. I just got done, well, I didn't get done recently, but after a while back, reading a book by a guy by the name of J.B. Hickson, who has written a series of books, and he makes the comment frequently that nothing is as it appears. Yeah. And we're going to, once we get through with this, I think I'm going to get into a pretty in-depth study on deception. What's going on in the world? Because Jesus warned us about deception, to be on the guard for it. And that topic is so huge. And we really haven't gotten into deception in any great detail in the past, but I think once I get through with this, I've got some things ready to go. So I think you'll find that interesting. It's not just the deception that we read about in Matthew 24 and the Olivet Discourse, but it's deception throughout the world. Again, as JB says, nothing is as it seems. You can't believe a word of what you're hearing, be it in the media or anywhere. So then we'll get into globalization, another huge topic. The powers to be, the elites, are moving us toward a one world government, a new world order. And it is amazing. It is shocking. If we get to it tonight, you're going to hear some things that are being predicted. I won't call them predictions, I'll call them more warnings by people in the know. I call them people in the know, the elites, the World Economic Forums and the Klaus Schwabs and the Club of Rome and all these different groups, people in our own administration that are all together intentionally doing what they're doing, or not just but around the world. Then we'll spend some time talking about persecution and totalitarianism. And that's based on what we read in Daniel chapter 7 and in Revelation 17. We'll take a look at, if we get a chance, I don't think we'll get to that tonight. Um, we're going to take a look at that. What's going on in terms of totalitarianism? I mean, there's some crazy things like in England now. People are being arrested for what they say. That's happening here. Persecution and censorship, all part of what's going on. And I believe it's all part of what JB calls this Luciferian conspiracy, that Lucifer himself is in charge. And we're seeing such a black cloud of evil over the world today, I think unlike any time we've ever seen before. Then we'll talk about American decline. We've talked about that in the past. There is no role for the United States in the end days, at least in terms as a power of it being a power player. We're not there. And I listened the other day to a fellow talk about what's going on or what about Ezekiel 38, 39, and kind of a hint to the fact that at least the United States won't be there to support Israel when this attack occurs. Probably because we're going to be relegated to third world nation status. And I think we can see so much is going on right now that it's almost inevitable. And the last thing we'll talk about is the election. I'm not going to make any predictions about the election. I don't want this to be a political discussion, but I will say this: I'm not voting for Kamala Harris, that's for sure. Other than that, I'm not saying that I'm any bigger supporter of Donald Trump. I like his policies, but there's some things about him that we as Christians should be concerned about, i.e., his position on abortion, his position on the LBGT thing, and so on and so forth. But more of that to come. So that's it. We're going to start with an update on Israel. And I've entitled this Israel Update Alone in the World. And that's exactly, as we'll see in a moment, we're going to look at some scriptures where the Bible's very clear that as we get toward the end of the age, that Israel is going to be all alone with no supporters. And we have right now, I believe, and if things don't change, it's only going to get worse, the most anti-Israel administration in U.S. history. And that doesn't bode well for us. Because God's made some promises, which we'll talk about. I think we're all familiar with. But I just got and I don't know if anybody else got it today or not, but I got a newsletter, third quarter newsletter from Jan Markell, and just came in today. And I'm going to read a quote from her newsletter that I think is pretty appropriate. And it is the following quote: Israel is being set up. She's being betrayed, even by once strong supporters in Washington, D.C. She's isolated and viewed as a burdensome stone, according to Zechariah 12:3. Almost everyone Israel trusts let her down. She will drop her guard one more time when Antichrist comes along to sweep her off her feet. We've talked about that and we'll continue to talk about that. But the setup is in process. When she was attacked on October 7th, 2023, a natural response would have been global support. You would have thought that Israel did have support for a short period of time. Just the opposite happened. Global anti-Semitism enveloped the entire world. That was, probably to me, the most significant end time signs that I've seen in my lifetime was the sudden, out of nowhere explosion after October 7th of worldwide anti Semitism, including campuses and on the streets in the United States, such that there are people today telling Jewish folks that don't live in Israel, you better have a backup plan. You better have a plan to make Aliyah, to move back to Israel, because that might be, and probably will, be the only safe place to be. And it's interesting that since October 7th, the number of people that have emigrated back to Israel from various places throughout the world, including the United States, has off the charts.
Do you mean all Jewish people?
What about all?
You said Jewish people. You just
Yes.
my one of my best friends is Jewish, and we're having lunch tomorrow.
Well, I'm not saying it's going to be bad right now, but they need to be prepared because the anti-Semitism. You just look on the news, what's going on in certain places like NYU and Columbia and New York City. Massive numbers of people coming out and protesting in support of the so-called Palestinians. So it's becoming increasingly dangerous. All I'm saying is they're probably okay for now, but they need a plan. So something to think about. Global anti-Semitism enveloped the entire world. It's been so stunning, one could not have perceived this level of hate that is actually unique to the 30s and sadly to this modern generation. So, in other words, what we're seeing today is reminiscent of what happened during the time of World War II with the Third Reich and their plan to eliminate every Jew off the face of the earth. And it's interesting as we go back through history, even in the Bible, go back to the time of and how he attempted to wipe out the Jewish people. And then Herod comes along later and tempted to eliminate Jesus Christ by killing all the young males 2 years and younger. There has been this, and then we have other attempts throughout history and how they were so mistreated by the Egyptians and the Assyrians and so forth. And then comes Germany, and just, it's like I read recently about Germany, probably the most educated, sophisticated country in the world at the time, but yet through the propaganda, and that's one of the things we're going to talk about. When we get to deception, there is so much propaganda being spewed out right now, probably unlike any other time in history, that so much propaganda that so many of the German people became murderers. And we're seeing the same today. We're seeing the same scenario unfold. And it's satanic. It has to be because it's not in the least bit logical. Actually unique to the 30s and sadly to this modern generation, ignited the Nazi passion to quote, gas the Jews. Isn't it interesting that after um, October 7th, the people in uh, I believe it was Australia or New Zealand. One of the two were actually chanting, "Gas the Jews." That was one of the things that we heard. And why? You know, they go through what they went through on October 7th, absolute atrocities, and people are yelling at. Again, it's been breathtaking, and the panorama is set to further explode this fall and winter. And this ties into what Jesus said in the Olivet Discourse. Remember, Jesus said, when you begin to see all these things, the wars, the rumors of the wars, and pestilence and earthquakes and so on and so forth, that they're like birth pangs, which means they're going to become more intense and more frequent as we get closer to the event. So as we're watching all these things, and I think if we just sit here and we look back over the last 5, 10, 15 years, clearly that's being played out. Things are getting worse and worse and worse. They're not going to get better. And I think the reason we're not going to get better is I believe fully, completely, as do many of the people I listen to, people that are a lot better educated and knowledgeable than I am, they're saying the same thing. We're there. We're just about there. So we can expect the rapture of the church to take place really at any time. There's nothing that remains for that to happen. Again, it's been breathtaking. The panorama is set to further explode this fall and winter. Jews have been reprogrammed in recent months to run and hide. That's a quote from Jan Markell's latest update. Comments on that? That, in a nutshell, is kind of what we're seeing. So let's take a look at that. I don't know if you can see this map, but let's just look at a couple of scriptures that tell us about um, Israel and God's relationship to them and how they're going to be uh, left alone as we get closer to the end of the age. Let's start with, and this is the granddaddy, I believe. of all prophecies that we find in Genesis chapter 12, familiar to all of us, but just as a reminder, we'll run through it again. But in Genesis chapter 12, beginning in verse 3, or beginning in verse, we'll start in verse 1. This is when God called Abram out of the Ur of the Chaldees, which was in what we know today, I believe, to be Iraq, and said the following. The Lord said to Abram, now why did he pick Abram? We don't really know, other than because the culture at the time had become very paganistic, very much pagan worshipers, just like the time when Noah and the flood took place. The world had become completely in a state of immorality and debauchery and anti-God. So God identified somehow, some way, Abram and said, "Leave your country, your people, and your father's household to the land I will show you." So that term right there, the land I will show you, becomes extremely significant as we move along. He goes on to say, I will make you into a great nation. So what he's saying here is that he needed to create a new race of people, a new group of people, if you will, through whom he could reveal himself and used for multiple purposes, like recording his words and recording and preserving the scriptures, and through the lineages where Jesus Christ would come from, and so forth. He says, "I will make you into a great nation." So what he's saying here, and we won't get too much into it right now, but it's just a fascinating study when you think that he's telling Abram, who at this time is about 90 years old or so, that he is going to be the first in a line of a new uh, group of new nation, new people. And that, of course, is Israel. And a lot more that develops after that. And he says, I will bless you. I will make your name great. You will be a blessing. Now, here's where it gets interesting. I will bless those who bless you. And so you look through history and say, are there examples of that? And I say, there's no better example of that than the United States of America. That in 1948, Israel becomes a nation after 2,000 years with the Jews being scattered throughout the world. And the David Ben-Gurion and the original leaders of Israel declared and determined that Israel again would be a nation. So on May 14th, 1948, Israel becomes a nation for the second time. And so what he said, and then if you go beyond that, it was after that that Harry Truman, 3 days later, acknowledged, in spite of resistance from members of his own cabinet, one of which was the Secretary of State, whose name escapes me, and says, if you do this, I'm going to vote for the next Democratic candidate. But Harry said, I know Bible prophecy, I know scripture. My mother taught me. And she told me that someday I will be in a position to help the people, to help the Jewish people. And I'm going to do it. So he recognized Israel. And I believe it's because of that. If you think about the 50s and the 60s and the 70s, not only that, but we were founded on Christian principles. But slowly we've moved away. We've been Israel's primary supporter. Isn't that what, 7, 8 million Jews live and doors wide open for them. But now those doors are starting to close. And so if we take that blessing that I believe the United States has had because of not just its Christian heritage, but because of its acceptance and support of the nation of Israel, that we've been blessed. But then look, then the very next word, and whoever curses you, I will curse. Myriad examples of that throughout history, not the least of which is the British Empire. If you think back, many of us, my people my age anyway, can remember when Britain was considered to be the empire upon which the sun didn't set. It was huge. They had possessions all over the world. But Great Britain, we'll go through went through a study of the what happened in the early 1900s with the Balfour Declaration and other things, and then they had agreed that Israel should again become a nation. They reneged on it later. They abandoned their responsibility to the United Nations. Today, Great Britain is just a shadow of what it once was, and its economy today is in shambles. It's being overrun by Muslims. They're coming up with all kinds of draconian uh, methods of controlling people and so forth. Whoever curses you, and there's plenty of other examples, which we could go through, but we don't really have time right now. But whoever curses you, I will curse. So he's blessed the United States, I believe, one of the many nations, a few nations that has legitimately blessed Israel. But whoever curses you, I will curse. And that is a promise not just to Abraham or to Abram and to Isaac, his direct his son, and then Jacob and 12 tribes and all of the descendants after that. But he said, I will curse those who curse you. The world is going to be cursed because it is turning against Israel. The United Nation or the United States, I believe very strongly, will be cursed. It may already be, I think God's hand of protection that we read about in Romans 1 is being lifted because we've turned away from him. We've turned away from God, from Jesus Christ. We've kicked him out of schools, and we're beginning full bore to turn on Israel. Now, in terms of the elections, again, the current administration, and I don't know if you saw that when Bibi Netanyahu was here, gave the speech, Kamala Harris didn't even attend. That says it all right there. And I believe any Christian that I have to question any Christian that says they're going to vote for Kamala Harris. I have to honestly do. I mean, it's just it doesn't make an ounce of sense. And I'm going to in a minute give you some quotes from her vice presidential candidate about a two-state solution, which is nothing but an evil pipe dream. All peoples on earth will be blessed. All peoples on earth will be blessed by you. Then if we go down to verse 6, Abram traveled through the land as far as the site of the great tree of Moreh in Shechem. At that time, the Canaanites were in the land. Well, we're going to talk about the Nephilim in a couple of weeks, maybe a month or two. And these Canaanites became a pretty nasty group to the point where God told them, the Israelites, to wipe them right off the face of the earth. Every man, woman, child, livestock, everything. Why? Because they had become evil beyond evil. We'll talk more about that at a later date. The Lord appeared to Abram and said, the Lord appeared to Abram and said, to your offspring I will give what? This land. He's talking about what was at that time Canaan. So he said, I'm giving it to you. Then if we go over into verse 13, chapter 16, or verse 14, we read, the Lord said to Abram, after Lot had parted from him, look around from where you are to the north and to the south. And he was in Hebron at that time. And so he was looking figuratively at a much bigger piece of real estate than Israel currently occupies. The land that Israel is going to control during the millennial kingdom stretches from Egypt up into Iraq, up into Lebanon. It's a huge territory, but today they occupy just a sliver, a small piece of that land. And it's interesting that here it is, what, 20 miles from border to border or whatever, and the U.S. administration and others are pushing for a state solution, which means the West Bank becomes part of a Palestinian state. We'll talk and we'll see what the Palestinians really think about the Israelis. You know how much room there would be from the edge of that territory where it happened to the Mediterranean Sea? about 9 miles. Israel would be indefensible. And the leader of the Palestinian Authority, Abbas, just recently called for the expulsion from that territory, from Judea and Samaria, of 500,000 Jews. In other words, it's occupied territory. And you ever hear the term the occupied West Bank or terms like that? My recommendation is correct that person right then and there. Is not occupied by Jewish people. It's their land. God gave it to them as an eternal inheritance. But he's called for the expulsion of 500,000 Jews. They're not interested in a two-state solution. I've got a video here that will kind of attest to that if we get to it. Um, so Abram traveled through the land. And anyone, look, I'm sorry. Verse 14. The Lord said to Abram after Lot had parted him, look around from where you are to the north and the south, to the east and the west. All the land you see, I will give to you and your offspring. What? Forever. Okay? What does that mean? It's still theirs. Forget about all this stuff about who was there. We know the archaeological evidence to support that the Jews have been in Israel for the last 3,000 years or more is overwhelming. There's never been an ounce of proof otherwise. There's not a single reference in the Quran to Jerusalem or Israel. But in the Bible,
Speaks about Israel belonging to the Jews.
yeah, well, that's what they have said. Yeah, if you go back to the Husseini and others, some of the original finders of the Palestinian movement. Then he says, "I will make your offspring like the dust of the earth." Remember, this is still when uh, Isaac had not yet come along. He says, "I want to make your offspring like the dust of the earth, so that if anyone could count the dust, then your offspring could be counted. Go walk the length and the breadth of the land. I am giving it to you." So Abram went to live near the great trees of Mamre at Hebron, where he pitched his tent. There he built an altar to the Lord. Then, if we went into chapter 15 and other spots, we find out again, in fact, this covenant that God made with Abraham and his descendants are everlasting. So that means the land belongs in God's eyes to the Jews today. But what are we trying to do? We're trying to stick our finger in God's eye. Remember, Zechariah chapter 2 says that Israel is the apple of God's eye. So anything that happens that is contrary to that it's not going to go well. We can count on being cursed. Absolutely count on it. And I can tell you, there's a fellow by the name of Bill Koenig who wrote a book entitled Eye to Eye. I know John has read it. I haven't actually read it, but he goes through and outlines all of the things that have happened in this country when we have done things to Israel that we shouldn't do. For example, in 2005, um, um, 2005, Gaza was given over to the Arabs, and all of the Jews that were living in Gaza at the time were expelled. A lot more to the story, but the point is that very day Hurricane Katrina hit.
Really?
And then there's a story of I can remember it here. I just heard it yesterday. Um, when this is when uh, when it was announced that President Trump initiated the Abraham Accords, which everybody thought were wonderful, and they were great because it led to uh, relations between Israel and the Emirates and others. But hidden in that agreement was a provision to divide the land. When that document came out, that very day, Peter Navarro comes into Trump's office and says, "We've got a major crisis on our hands," referring to the COVID pandemic. So you can't just assume that those things happen coincidentally, and there's hundreds of those other such examples. So, uh, getting to this particular slide, well, let's before we do that, look at a couple other scriptures, beginning with Zechariah chapter 12. I know in this group we've read this many times, but it's such an important and significant prophecy. Zechariah is an amazing book from cover to cover. But what we read in Zechariah chapter 12, verses 1 through 3, the word of the Lord concerning Israel, the Lord who stretches out the heavens, who lays the foundations of the earth, and who forms the human spirit within a person, declares. That to me is a powerful verse, but it really affirms who God is. He is the creator of everything. He's the one that stretched out the heavens. He's the one that laid the foundations of the earth and formed the human spirit within a person. But then he declares, listen to this, the personal pronoun I. God is orchestrating everything that's going on over there. God is not, he's not necessarily doing it, but he's allowing these things to occur because he is going to reveal himself in a way that humanity has never before experienced in multiple different ways. But he says, I, personal pronoun I am going to make Jerusalem a cup that sends all the surrounding peoples reeling. Judah will be besieged as well as Jerusalem. So that's a reference, I believe, to Armageddon and during the tribulation. But what we're seeing is the prelude to this. Now, talking about the cup, it was reported that one of the reasons that Hamas attacked Israel in the first place was that they had gotten word that Israel was in the process of possibly pushing to rebuild their temple on Temple Mount. And so, because the Arabs are so deathly afraid of that, that's one of the reasons it was reported that they actually did this attack. Now, whether or not that's true, I don't know, but I think it could have been a contributing factor.
The Jews can't build.
Is I am going to make Jerusalem, pardon me?
The Jews can't build the temple until the mosque is off the Temple Mount, or it would be a holy one.
Right. Well, that's likely what they were afraid of, is that Israel had a plan to do that
Well,
in something.
they don't have that plan. I mean, there's a cornerstones are already there, but it can't happen until the mosque is gone. But if you really want to talk about Judaism, they actually believe the temple will come from on high down.
I believe that's after the millennial kingdom. That's
Revelation.
the New Jerusalem.
Yeah, the New Jerusalem.
This is the third temple, which we read about in Daniel. We read about it. Jesus spoke about it.
And we got to
Second Thessalonians speaks about it. Revelation 11 speaks about it. There will be a third temple. Then there will be a.
blow it up by accident.
Pardon me?
We're hoping that one of their rockets accidentally lands on their own mosque. Because the minute that happens, we're ready. We're there. The
Yeah.
corners are already,
Yeah.
cornerstones are already built.
You familiar with Ben Gavir?
Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah. What is he saying?
Ben
He's saying that all Jews should be allowed to pray. That's a step in that direction.
Yeah.
You've got the Temple Mount Institute. Every artifact, every article needed for reestablishment of the worship is made.
Yeah.
Even the high priest's gowns, or their whatever it is they wear, and the ephod. And they've even gotten to the point where, through I believe it's either DNA or whatever chromosomal testings, are able to identify the descendants of Aaron. Everything is ready. The only thing that hasn't happened is, like you say, right now that Temple Mount is an obstacle. But there will be a temple. There has to be, and I believe it's going to be built very soon. And then there'll be that one you talk about later. We'll get to that at a later time. But there will be a temple. Anyway, I am going to make Jerusalem a cup that sends not all surrounding peoples reeling. Judah will be besieged on that day. Listen to this: when all, not some, all nations of the earth are gathered against it. Now, granted, that's a reference to Armageddon. But it doesn't say some nations. It doesn't say all nations except the United States. It says all nations will turn against and attack Israel. No exception.
Yes, but Israel stands.
Yeah. All who try to move it will injure themselves. And then if we go to chapter 14 and verse 2, again, a reference to Armageddon, I will gather all the nations to, not some, all the nations to Jerusalem to fight against it. The city will be captured, the houses ransacked, the women raped. All of the city will go in exile, but the rest of the people will not be taken from the city. So that's a whole study in and of itself. But clearly, the point is that we are moving to the point where all nations will be against Israel. And if we go to Joel chapter 3, Joel 3, verses 1 and 2. In those days and at that time, when you see a reference to in those days and at that time, that's a reference to the last days, to the times that we're moving toward today. When I restore the fortunes of Judah and Jerusalem. So that's essentially been done. And it's continuing to improve. But if you went back to the start of the 19th or the 20th century, Israel was in Jerusalem was pretty much desolate. But today it's been restored and it's just a magnificent place. Then he goes on to say, I will gather what? There we have it again. All nations. And who's doing it? God Almighty. And bring them down to the valley of Jehoshaphat. So there's going to come a point in time, Antichrist is going to be in control. He's going to have controls, we'll see in a bit, when we get to globalization. He's going to have control of the entire world, including what might be left of the United States. So we'll talk about what could happen to the United States. There's a lot of potential scenarios that could bring us down and bring us down pretty quickly. So more on that to come. And then in Luke 21, Luke 21 is also the Olivet Discourse. And in verse 24, it says, they will fall by the sword and be taken as prisoners to what? All nations. Jerusalem would be trampled on by the Gentiles until the times of the Gentiles are fulfilled. So what does that mean? That Jerusalem is going to be under siege and attack and control till it's no longer under the control of Gentile nations. That time is coming. And that's very consistent with what we read about way back in the book of Daniel chapter 2, where it talks about this statue, which is a prophecy of all of the coming empires after Nebuchadnezzar, and how there's this rock cut without hands from a mountain that comes and shatters this great statue, which represents whatever at the end of the age is left of all of those empires. And that rock is Jesus Christ. So we have that, and then finally in Romans, a lot of people think that God is finished with Israel. It's a hideous, horrible disease.
Think so.
I call it a disease called replacement theology, that God has replaced the Jews.
Yeah.
And you can't get there as replaced Israel, that the church has replaced Israel in God's eternal plan. Well, when God uses terms such as forever and everlasting, and says, as he does in Jeremiah, that as long as the sun, the moon, the stars are still there, I will continue to take care of Israel. He's never going to give up on Israel. We see that pretty clearly in, well, certainly in Romans 9, which we won't get to now, but in Romans 1, Romans 11, verses 1 through 36. And I'm not going to read all of that. Let's just start in verse 25 of Romans 11. I would encourage you to read the rest because it really talks about the beginning of the church age and the relationship between Israel and the Gentiles. And as a Gentile or as Gentiles, as we read about throughout the New Testament, and through in Jeremiah. Remember the new covenant that Jesus said, "This is the new covenant. My blood is shed for the new covenant." Basically, he was fulfilling a prophecy made back in the book of Jeremiah. A prophecy for who? The Jewish people. The new covenant was for the Jew. But yet we come here now after after that new covenant was established and fulfilled, and we see something pretty interesting. In Romans 20 or Romans 11:25, I do not want you, talking to Gentiles, to be ignorant of this mystery, brothers and sisters, so that you may not be conceited. Israel has experienced a hardening in part until the full numbers of the Gentiles has come in. Now that's kind of a difficult to understand um, first, but let's see if we can drill down and understand a little bit. He's telling us as Gentiles, don't be ignorant of this mystery, fellow Christians, brothers and sisters, so that you may not be conceited. In other words, don't be conceited because you're you're now a part of the church and think that Israel has been left behind. He says you are made you become believers or Christians or part of the church in part to make Israel jealous,
This will never
so
happen.
that you may not be conceited. So that we as Christians should be witnessing to the unbelieving Jews, just like we should be witnessing to unbelieving Gentiles. And then Israel has experienced a hardening in part. Now, I don't know what you think about this, but here's what this means. It means that most Jews, their hearts have been hardened by God against the gospel. Doesn't mean, and it's notice it says in part. It doesn't mean all Jews, because certainly, and here's an example, in Amir Sephardi, there are millions of Jews and have been throughout that have accepted Christ. So when it says hardened in part, that means many of them have been hardened, and uh, but they're only in part, which means there's going to be Jewish believers. And so what it says is their hardening is going to be it's going to be there or in existence until the full number of the Gentiles has come in. Now, what does that mean? That's a prophecy about the rapture, that at
About
some
what?
point in time,
Prophecy
there'll
about
be a
what?
Gentile who will accept Christ.
Um,
The rapture will occur, take the church up, Jews and Gentiles that have accepted Christ alike, to be with Jesus. And in this way, all Israel will be saved, as it is written. The deliverer will come from Zion. That's a reference to Jesus Christ. He will turn godlessness away from Jacob, Israel. And this is my covenant with them when I take away their sins. So what he's saying here is that, and we get into the latter chapters of Zechariah, where Jesus said, I will not drink of this cup again until you acknowledge my name, Matthew 23. He's not referring to Gentiles, he's referring to Jews. So at some point in the future, it'll happen during the tribulation, that the Jews are going to reach out to Jesus Christ. And it's not until they acknowledge him as Messiah that he can come back. We said this before, every Gentile on the face of the earth could accept Christ. But until the Jews acknowledge him, which most of them have not yet, he can't come back and he won't. And what we see, it's interesting, whether it's Matthew 24 or Luke 21 or whatever, what we have is a Jewish Messiah giving a roadmap to the future to his Jewish apostles about a Jewish nation. The gospel or the Olivet Discourse, all about the end of the age with the abomination of desolation, it's all about Israel.
Can I interject something? I don't think the Jews have such a hard time accepting. First of all, they have no problem accepting the Messiah. Many are very open to the Messiah potentially being Jesus.
Mhm.
It's that they don't adopt him as a God because there's one God, and it's that they don't adopt Christianity.
Right.
So it's very hard for the Christian mind to understand how can you believe in Jesus
Right.
and not adopt the New Testament, which is replacement theology because the
And
Torah is not.
I think that's what this is saying, whether you want to call it the Messiah or that he is divine or that he is God. And I know they struggle with that.
Well, that's because the entire Torah says one God, none beside me.
Right.
Those
But
times
who
one God.
Jesus said, here were a couple of things. You know, Jesus said, when they asked him who he was, are you the Son of God? What did he say? He said, I
He did say
am. He says, I am. And so he was acknowledging what he heard from the burning bush, which was the voice of God. I am. So he says, I am. And the evidence that he and God are one and the same is just irrefutable.
well,
So this is what the Jews don't believe. I understand it. They believe he's a prophet, they believe he came, but they don't necessarily believe, just like Muslims.
but
Muslims think
maybe
he
they
was a,
believe that he's the Messiah. The point is they don't adopt the Christian story. This is a Jewish Messiah. He's that said he's a Jew, and Jesus did the job of the Messiah, bringing the whole pagan world into monotheism. But I don't think that the Jews have a problem with Jesus as much as they have a problem making him a deity. Or
but
they're not.
that's the key right there.
You don't
That
have
is the
to
key.
be a
No,
Christian to
it,
accept the Messiah. The
no, you
Messiah.
don't. You don't have to. You have to, well, you have to be a Christian to accept his deity, to
Right.
accept who he is, that he
And
is God.
the second
He's the
king.
Son of God, the Son of God, God in the flesh.
So these like, oh,
Now, I understand that many Jews believe he is the Messiah, although many believe he hasn't come yet.
well, actually, there's two messiahs, as you know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, at any rate, let's move on. Um, so, Romans 11, I think 1 through 36. So, with that in mind, let's take a look at this map. This just came out. I don't know if you can see it or not, but this is a map of nations around the world that recognize the state of Palestine, or that Palestine should be or is a nation. And here, I don't know if you can read it, but let me read it to you. This little clip here. It says the state of Palestine, comprising the Gaza Strip and the West Bank, has been recognized by 138 of 193 UN member states. Now remember, Israel is going to be all alone in the world. Is this not an indication that we're heading in that direction with 109 or 138 of 193 nations acknowledging or recognizing the state of Palestine, which, first of all, no Jew in Israel believes that there should be a state of Palestine. You know, it just doesn't exist, and it would be it's a pipe dream. It's never going to happen. But yet, through propaganda and all this anti-Semitism and so forth that's happening throughout the world, this is where we are. This is a pretty significant percentage of the total. In the United States, at least with the current administration, and I would suggest whichever way it goes, uh, basically accepts the same idea, which a state of Palestine in Israel, never going to happen, but yet they're pushing for it. So here's some highlights of things that I've read over the last couple of months, and I want to preface it by this little introductory paragraph. It says the nations of the earth are developing a posture that is hostile toward Israel. This is continuously developing in our headlines. Just look at the evening news and watch the horrific uh, um, marches and so forth that are taking place. Paris calls Eastern Jerusalem occupied after Israel deports Palestinian French terrorists. EU article. They gave their support for a two-state solution. Unwavering support on the basis of the 1967 lines living side by side. 1967 was the East Jerusalem was part of Jordan at that point in time, and that's where the Temple Mount and the holy sites are. So according to this, that should all be given up for a new state of Palestine. Do you think the Jews are going to do that? There's no way. The article says that this is the first time since 2017 with such text. Now that Netanyahu is in office, they demanded two states, which means relinquishing West Bank, Judea, and Samaria. Notice they must go back to the lines before the Six-Day War, which occurred in self-defense, which they took in self-defense. They were attacked, and they defeated those enemies in just 6 days. But if you ever look at the what's interesting is I like to ask pastors that don't necessarily talk about Israel or Bible prophecy and try to get their take on the modern state of Israel. Because the chances of Israel existing today are about the same as me being struck by lightning 10 times. It's just an impossibility. And why is that? Because God has been there with them every step of the way. If you just ever studied the history of the War of Independence and the Six-Day War and the 73 War, Yom Kippur War, miracle after miracle after miracle, Israel had no right or no way that they could defeat those enemies. And we're seeing the same thing today. I personally think what's happening in Gaza, in spite of the propaganda, which we'll talk a little bit about, is miraculous. Granted, they've lost, what, 900 troops, which is horrible. But what they've been able to do without really any support whatsoever, and to do it in the most humane way, in spite of what the world says, without creating any humanitarian crises, which is what the world tries to condemn them of, they have been, and I believe it's God's hand. And why is it that this whole Hezbollah thing has been kind of put on the back burner? Granted, there's been a lot of rocket exchanges, but it's almost like God saying, okay, finish up with Hamas, then we'll take care of Hezbollah. And oh, by the way, in the meantime, get rid of those terrorists out of Judea and Samaria,
Yeah.
which is happening as we speak as well. So here's a couple of articles and I'm not going to, some of the articles I'll read, some of them will just give you the headlines for. This was an article entitled, Is Anti-Israel Pastor Appointed as Head to the Head of the World Council of Churches? You talk about an evil organization. That's one. Reverend Professor Dr. Jerry Pillay, a South African United is what it should say, Presbyterian church member, has been elected as the next General Secretary of the World Council of Churches. His term will begin, this is obviously an older article, began in 2023. He's compared Zionism. So what's Zionism? All Zionism is a desire by Jewish people to move back and to have their own land to live in. That's what a Zionist is. That's it. But the media likes to make it sound like these evil Zionists, just like Make America Great is MAGA people who support making America great again is somehow evil. They've got this amazing way of twisting and distorting things. So, compared Zionism to apartheid in his native South Africa and called on fellow Christians to, quote, resist the empirical ambition of Israeli Jews. What a bunch of garbage. But yet, this is one church, the Presbyterian Church, and there are other churches that are beginning to fall in line. We've got some pretty nasty things coming out of what's the church in England? The
Church of England.
huh?
Church in England is called the
Yeah,
Church of England.
and the same type of thing.
Anglicans.
Here's another one. Mexico seeks to join South Africa's ICI case against Israel over the war in Gaza. The ICI case is where the International Criminal Court uh, put an arrest warrant out for Netanyahu, and it was going to try Israel in the International Criminal Court. So the president of Mexico is supporting that.
What do you think of the fact that Germany,
Pardon me?
time again, Germany has come to the defense of Israel?
Right.
Of all nations.
I know.
Isn't that some kind of recompense?
Yeah. For now.
They are coming to Israel's defense over and over. They are shutting down all the apartheid,
Yeah.
noise from South Africa. It's kind of
It's crazy.
miraculous, isn't
Yep.
it?
Here's another one. Anti-Israel sentiment has permeated the Biden administration from the start. And subtitle of that was Zionist group identified dozens of current and former Biden administration officials with a history of anti-Israel and anti-Semitic comments. They're throughout the administration, throughout the deep state, throughout the bureaucracy. This next one, secret reason some European nations are helping Hamas. I do have an article. Let me see if I can go through some of that. This is an article that dates May 28th. It goes back to May 28th. As I say here, the secret reason some European nations are helping Hamas. And it goes on to say, in the past few days prior to May 28th, Hamas and other terrorist groups have been rejoicing over the decision by Ireland, Norway, and Spain. And by the way, since then, Great Britain has stopped exporting arms to Israel. So they're now in the camp. Uh, and Spain to recognize a Palestinian state. Remember, everything we talk about when it comes to Bible prophecy is global. You can't just look at it from the perspective of the United States, it's the whole world. And it's interesting that what we're seeing in terms of anti Semitism is worldwide. Like we said, 138 of 156 nations now support a Palestinian state. It's a move toward the time when all Israel will be alone. In fact, we're hearing that in kind of tongue in cheek from Bibi Netanyahu. We're going to do what we have to do. We don't care what the Biden administration or anybody else tells us. We've got to wipe these guys out, or they're gonna build back. You know. By the way, I have a video. I don't know if anybody's interested. It's about 20 minutes, and I just found it today. It's a guy that actually was able to tour Gaza, including the Philadelphia that you read so much in the news about corridor, which is underneath the surface of that corridor, and uh, Biden and Harris are trying to convince Israel to back off of that.
Yeah, why?
Right. Underneath that,
Why back off?
yeah, underneath that, well, because, yeah, underneath that are 200 tunnels. And those tunnels are coming from Egypt. And so now you're seeing Egypt get their backs up a little bit because they've been caught red handed. Egypt has been supplying or has been the mechanism, the funnel through which whoever is sending weapons to Hamas. So this guy has actually been there, and he made a comment like um, the soldiers, the troops are sick and tired of being told to back off the Philadelphia corridor and the other things. This guy, he was there, and it's about a 20-minute video. If anybody's interested in seeing it, it's very informative. It's right there. It's eyes on the situation, and it helps to bring clarity, I think tremendous clarity to what's really going on over there versus what we're hearing in the media. So, if anybody's interested, maybe we could set that aside and take up half of some week in the not too distant future and watch it. I think it's very, very well done. But this is somebody that's actually been in there, and you'll get a much different perspective than what you might be hearing elsewhere. But here's the article. Um, Germany. Now you talk about Germany. Not to be left out, said it would, quote, detain Bibi Netanyahu if he were to set foot on German soil and if the International Criminal Court issues an arrest warrant. Remember, all nations are going to come against Israel. So,
Do what?
huh? He said that um, Germany said that they would detain Bibi Netanyahu
Really?
if he were to set foot on German soil, quote, and if the International Criminal Court issues an arrest warrant.
Don't you think that a lot of these governments and a lot of these reports and a lot of these votes are really just the higher echelon, this cabal, but the majority of the people don't support all of these?
Oh, yeah, never said that. Yeah, right, absolutely. Yeah. Oh, yeah. But, they wield a lot of power, these guys. So then it goes on to say the recognition of a Palestinian state, even if it's merely a symbolic action, that has no bearing on the reality on the ground sends two messages to the Palestinians. First, that terrorism against the Jews is justified and worthwhile because the world, instead of punishing you, will reward you for your crimes. It says that the second, the Palestinians will not need to negotiate thorny issues with Israel, such as borders and the status of Jerusalem, because the international community will grant them everything on a platter. So when you see these nations lining up behind the so-called Palestinian cause, that sends a message to the terrorists, doesn't it? Ireland, Norway, Spain should have advised the Palestinians if they wanted anything from Israel, they should sit down and negotiate with the Israelis and not try to impose. You know, it's interesting that word impose. In Daniel 9, chapter 27, where it says Antichrist will enter into a covenant with Israel that will last 7 years, that the word really, and I'm using paraphrasing when I say entered into, but the Hebrew word for that is impose. That he will somehow impose a treaty between him and the nations in Israel. So it says here that they should not impose any solution on them with the help of the international community. The three countries, however, chose not to make any demands from the Palestinians before they announce their decision. So that's just like what's going on in the world. Everybody believes whatever they read, whatever they hear,
More importantly, why do they want to believe it?
because of it's satanic. You have to understand where this is coming from the pits of hell. Satan knows his time is short. He is going after Israel and the Jewish people with a vengeance. It's going to get worse and worse and worse. It's been that way throughout history. When we get to the Nephilim, we're going to see that there's been a seed war between the seed of the woman, Jesus Christ, and the seed of Satan, which will ultimately be the Antichrist. This war has been going on. That's Genesis 3:15. Probably the first not probably, definitely the first prophecy in the Bible speaks about this seed war between uh, Satan and Jesus Christ, and it's still going on today. Satan knows he's defeated. He was defeated at the cross, but he can't give up, and he knows, believes somehow. Because remember what we just said, Jesus cannot come back until they, who? Israel, acknowledge him. They recognize him. That's when he comes back. Satan knows that. So if he could wipe out every Jew on the face of the earth, which he tried to do, what, during the time of the Holocaust and today, if he could accomplish that, which he won't, then Jesus couldn't come back. And then he could continue for forever in eternity to be the God of this world. But he's defeated. I'll finish up with that later. Okay. Um, George Soros. It's interesting, you look at all these protests that are going on, like at Columbia and NYU and UCLA and the streets of New York, that those were largely funded by the Open Society Group, which is George Soros, Iran, and other very nefarious groups. They've actually funded these demonstrations. There are very dirty, nasty people out there, like Soros and others, that are behind this. Anti Israel protesters speaking out for all the right reasons. This is right from Waltz, the guy that's running with Kamala Harris. And this was on a Michigan radio interview. He says, quote, "We can't allow what happened in Gaza to happen. The Palestinian people have every right to life and liberty themselves. We need to continue to put leverage on I think what I'm supposed to say here is the Jews. I have the article. Um, he goes on to say Democratic vice presidential nominee Tim Walz said in a radio interview on Thursday that anti Israel protesters are, quote, speaking out for all the right reasons. What, from the river to the sea? Are you kidding me? and that more pressure should be applied to Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu to accept a Palestinian state. This guy is a total moron.
Yeah.
Period. End of conversation. He has no foreign policy experience. He has no idea what he's talking about. He's spouting these things off, and we're the ones that are going to pay the price. Because remember, God said He's going to curse those who curse them. And so, all I can say is, if they win, it's over. It's over anyway. But it's definitely over very quickly. He goes on to say, we can't allow what happened in Gaza to happen. The Palestinian people have every right to life and liberty themselves. We need to continue to put leverage on to make sure that we move toward a two-state solution. That's the policy right there. Two-state solution. And then Palestinian wants United Nations to, or Palestinian Authority, which is Mahmoud Abbas. He's the leader of the Palestinian Authority, 87 years old. He did his doctoral thesis uh, on the fact that the Holocaust never occurred. That's what he did his doctoral thesis on. You see him shaking hands with all these leaders. He shakes hands with Joe Biden, with Putin, with this person, with that person. Abbas, the leader of the Palestinian Authority. Yeah. Um, he wants Palestinian Authority wants the United Nations to order removal of 500,000 Jews from Judea and Samaria. The resolution is expected to be brought to a vote at the UN General Assembly, which is scheduled on September 10th. I would be shocked if it passed, but stranger things have
It
happened.
doesn't matter if it passes.
Pardon me?
It doesn't matter if it passes.
No, I know. That's true. That's absolutely 100%. It's not going to happen. Another one, David Friedman. U.S. pressure on Israel reduces chances of a regional peace. The Biden administration thinks that such pressure improves the chances of Israeli Saudi peace, but it actually does the opposite, said the former ambassador to Israel. Netanyahu says, shameful. The United Kingdom's arms embargo strengthens what the United Kingdom recently did, issued an arms embargo against Israel. After the next one, after Hamas kills hostages, Biden pressures Netanyahu on a truce deal. Like the next day, these six people are mercilessly killed, executed. And I don't know if anybody's read about the condition those people were in. They were in a tunnel which they couldn't even stand up in, was only wide enough for two people. They were emaciated. They were in horrible shape, and then they were just summarily um, executed because Israeli troops were getting close. And then finally, I mentioned that video. We can talk more about that. Very informative. I think maybe next week, maybe not, but at some point we'll get into that. Okay, because I think it's very informative. So I want to next week start with an update on Gog and Magog, Ezekiel 38 and 39, and some of these other topics. And once we get done with that, we'll move into deception. And then what I want to do after deception, which we've never done in the history of me being in this class, and I apologize for that, is to talk about heaven. What's it going to be like? What's the kingdom age going to be like? What's going to happen? And it's something that when we get through that study, hopefully it'll give us that renewed uh, just desire for Jesus to come back, because what lies ahead is just remarkable beyond remarkable. Can't even, so I want to go in and spend a good couple of weeks just talking about after we did, and maybe we'll do the heaven thing before deception. We'll see. But the heaven thing is very, very exciting. And I say that only because I've had the opportunity to listen to a couple of real good teachings lately, and I think you'll enjoy it. Yeah. Remember,
Who's the author? Thank you. Oh, perfect.
so there's a scripture we're all probably familiar with in Romans 8, I believe it is, where it says something, and I'm paraphrasing, the sufferings we experience today are not worthy to be the compared to the glory that will be revealed in us later. And it is, I tell you, it makes the hairs on my back just stick up, and it's exciting. We live in very exciting times. It's like I said in my little email that I sent out, God doesn't give us property, the prophecy to scare us. He gives it to us to prepare us. So let's finish. Father, we just thank you, Lord, for this time. And Lord, we live in exciting times. And we just thank you, Lord, for providing us with your word. And we know that 30% of your word is devoted to your return. And it's a subject that you deem to be important. 2 days before you were arrested, you gave your servants, your apostles, the sermon on the or the Olivet Discourse. And so, if you did that close to your crucifixion, it's a topic that you want discussed. And we thank you, Lord, that we have the freedom now to be able to come in and study this amazing topic and to take away from it whatever it is you want us to take away, and just it helps us, Lord, to come to an absolute certainty. When we think about fulfilled prophecy, it proves beyond a shadow of a doubt that your word is God breathed, it's true, it's accurate, it's reliable from cover to cover. We thank you for that and do so in the name of our Savior, Jesus Christ. Amen.